Welcome to Tuesday's Tips from Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura. And often in sewing we need a seam to go in one direction and well, it wants to go in another direction. No matter how often we steam it, press it, do whatever, it wants to go in its own direction. Well, sometimes we will need to force that seam. There are a couple of ways of doing it. We can glue it, we can hand stitch it, and we can fuse it. Well, I have an easy way that sort of combines them all, and it is going to force that seam into the direction you want it to go into. So a lot of times we want a seam pressed open and flat. Well, after a couple of washings, doesn't matter how often we iron that, it wants to go in its own direction. There's a product out there called Fusible Thread, and this one is from Superior Threads. It is called the Charlotte's Fusible Web, and it looks exactly like thread. It's strong like thread, however, it is not thread. It is glue or a fusible web. And this, when it hits heat, will melt into a glue, which is very handy for a lot of different applications. So in order to get that seam to press down into the direction that we want, you can use the fusible thread into a nice big needle and run the needle through the back of the stitches. Another way would be to put this fusible web right on your bobbin, and then on the back of your seam you will run the stitching from the bobbin, and then the top of your thread you would just use regular thread. Now you can use a zigzag stitch with the glue towards the fabric, or you can use a straight stitch. So the fusible thread is on the bottom, and you can see how this seam wants to go in this direction. And I want it to go flat. So I've put the fusible thread on each side that's going to attach to the main fabric, and then I'm able to press the seam open. So when I iron it flat, the top thread will come right off, and the glue has remained in the seam. Now, if you're having problems removing that thread, put the iron down and you will be able to move the thread right underneath the heat of the iron. And then you're able to let that cool down, and that seam will press nice and flat and fuse to the main fabric. So the seam has been pressed open and flat, and it's going to be comfortable from this side, and it looks so nice. And well, you have forced that seam to go in the direction that you want it to go into. Now I do need to make two notes though. Don't forget, this is a fusible web or a glue, so you do not want your iron to touch that thread, because just like any other fuse, it will stick to the sole of your iron. The other thing is, you do not want to use this for a regular seam, because well, when you hit it with heat, you are going to lose that seam. So in order not to make a mistake and use it as regular thread, keep it all together in a bag so you don't have that mistake. So with a little bit of heat and some fusible thread, well, you can do some seam magic and make that seam go in the direction you want it to go into. Thank you for joining me today on Tuesday's Tips. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back and let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.